One of the things that I have recommended for districts who are interested in integration is to not just start with CS as integrated, but to start with like CS or coding as its own thing, and then integrating after the kids and some of the teachers have had experience with it. Because it's really hard if we think of it from like the TPAC framework, like the technological knowledge, the pedagogical knowledge, and the content knowledge. If you're going to ask a bunch of teachers to not only teach their subject area, but to also learn the technology, which would be like the coding platform, the pedagogy involved with how to teach CS education or coding, and then the content knowledge involved with that, and how they intersect with other disciplines, it's really hard to do. But it'd be a lot easier if like, okay, in your coding class, you learned how to do this thing. Now we're going to take those concepts and apply it to this subject area. How can you take what you've learned like in Scratch to make a social studies project, etc.?
Yeah, it takes collaboration, and it takes, I think that it sort of starts to unveil and reveal all of the structural barriers to incorporating CS education into a school day. Like, that's why I love curricular integration. It's such a puzzle. Like, all of a sudden you realize, oh wait, teachers are in these disciplinary silos. They don't work together across disciplines. You know, when are we going to have enough time in the school day to fit in all of these, you know, to do this like rich multidisciplinary work?
Yeah, and I think that speaks to something that, you know, I think we can tease, but it's almost like its entire own subject. I think one of the really big questions that we have so much work to do on as a field is ultimately this question of how do we translate our values into practice, right? So really when it comes down to it, and this is work that, you know, I've been doing research on, you know, studying school district change over the course of years, you know, longitudinal studies of school districts, and really trying to see how do they go from, say, the process of doing a visions deliberation activity where they talk about like, well, we care about creativity and we care about, you know, social mobility and tech jobs, and to actually translate that into the kind of systems change. And when and how are they able to adhere to their values? When do they encounter barriers? Because so much of this work is about the complexity, really working within and trying to transform the existing ways that schools as institutions and districts as organizations are structured. And I think that's, you know, what Sarah was just talking about like, well, actually, do teachers across disciplines have like time to collaborate together? Heck, do teachers within disciplines have time to collaborate together? No. Right? I mean, so I mean, I think that, you know, I would hope that as we go about this work, we can both root these questions of how we translate values into system change as questions that we ask together as a field and really think about together, so that we're not just only thinking about kind of CS learning on a short time scale and within the kind of context of a curriculum or a classroom or a set of students, but really thinking about like, what does it actually really mean to undergo the kind of institutional transformation that are required to actually enact our values in this. And I think that there's more people who are doing this, but we really need everyone who's doing this work to be sharing those lessons back, not just, hey, I've got this great unit, but I want to actually know, like, how the heck did that unit come to be? If you're working within a school district and teachers worked on it, how did they even get there? How did they get enough knowledge to make it? And then what have you found out as you've tried to actually implement it over time or implement it at scale? Those are really critical questions.
Absolutely.
As I mentioned before at the start of recording, like, I'm really interested in the multi, inter, and transdisciplinary spaces and whatnot and engagement. But we can't even really get there yet if we still have like certification issues in that, well, what does it mean to be a CS educator in a state where there's no certification and there's no background in that? And how do you develop that professional knowledge and understanding and get qualified people in the room to do that? And then how do you get them to help others with integration? Like, there's all these things we have to get through before we can like really start diving deep into the integration stuff.
A lot of it, I think, is like all the levers that have to get pulled at once. Like, you need strong classroom examples to show people who train teachers or who prepare teachers to show that this is valid in a classroom. You need people who prepare teachers in order to, it's a cycle. You need all of like standards and policy and teacher prep and leadership. Like, everything has to be pulled at the same time in small ways in order to answer any of these questions.
Yeah. And I'm happy. I think at some point, I think we now are starting to see some models of how districts go about the process of change over time. to see like how do you pull different levers at what point, what's based on your particulars of the political situation in your district, the existing resources in your district, the existing knowledge of your team, the fact that you even have a team and you have routines around it, all of those. There's so many lessons that we're now starting to see around how do you even get started, right? How do you even get started as a district? And I think hopefully we'll have good things coming out and resources to support that process. I think the visions deliberation tools are part of that. The script rubric is another part of that. And certainly being connected to national communities and information sources like this podcast are really amazing, all going to kind of play into that question of how you get started.
This excerpt was from podcast number 21 of the CSK8 podcast, which was titled The CS Visions Framework, an Equity-Centered Computing Education with Rafi Santo and Sara Vogel. You can listen to the full episode as well as hundreds more by searching for the CSK8 podcast on your favorite podcast app.